Hi everyone, in this video we're going to unpack Milton and Barakat's article Higher Education as the Catalyst of Recovery in Conflicted Affected Societies. So let's get straight into it. Okay. Um, so higher education. So in this article, the aims of this article is first is to essentially just to examine the role of higher education, okay, in the recovery of conflict affected societies, and argues while the sector is typically a very low reconstruction priority, it has the potential, if addressed strategically, to act as a catalyst for effective and sustainable post-war recovery. So essentially what they are arguing is, in conflict area societies, higher education actually plays a big role, but when they are reconstructing societies that have undergone conflict, higher education is actually one of the lowest priority. But Milton and Barakat are arguing that if it is done strategically, it can be a catalyst for effective and sustainable post-war recovery. So the article begins by contextualizing higher education within broader debates around post-war recovery and education. It then analyzes the relationship between higher education and the four core intervention agendas in conflict affected societies, which is stabilization and securitization, reconstruction, state building, and peace building. So essentially this whole article is talking about how higher education can be used as a, I wouldn't say a tool, but rather like a dimension to help stabilize and provide security, reconstruct, for state building purposes, and also ultimately for peace building purposes. Um, so here's an outline of the key section and arguments of the paper. So in introduction, they make the case that higher education is neglected in post-conflict reconstruction efforts despite its potential to contribute to recovery. The paper examines how higher education relates to four core intervention agendas, which I said earlier, which is basically stabilization, and what was it, yep, here it is. Reconstruction, state building, and peace building. So higher education plays a big role in ensuring all of these four agendas, for all of these four key core intervention agendas are met. And basically, higher education can be mobilized in a way to achieve all of these four agendas. So, but the challenges face higher education in conflict settings. Firstly, there's of course physical destruction, population displacement and brain drain, war related conditions, so there's trauma, isolation, and reduced funding, low resilience of the sector compared to basic education. Of course, in any conflict areas, the first focus is on basic education. So, of course, in this kind of setting, higher education has low resilience in this way. uh, the neglect of higher education in post-work recovery. So higher education, of course, receives low priority and funding in reconstruction efforts, and the reasons include focus on basic education, which is essentially viewed as a long-term investment, um, and higher education is often connected to luxury. That is why, um, in many cases, sometimes higher education is seen not as a necessity but as a luxury. So the higher education's relationship to post-war recovery approaches. So in terms of stabilization and securitization, it can support or even undermine stability. Campuses can be seen as sites of political activism and potential radicalization. So that is why sometimes higher education is not given a priority, because it can be seen as potential radicalization, and the debate over link between higher education expansion and conflict risk. In terms of reconstruction, it provides skilled personnel and expertise for rebuilding, contributes to economic recovery and development. In terms of state building, higher education trains civil servants and government officials, um, supports governance and public administration, fosters national identity and social cohesion. In terms of peace building, of course, higher education promotes reconciliation and intergroup contact. It develops critical thinking and culture of dialogue, and researches root causes of conflict. In terms of conclusion, higher education has significant potential. So, in the conclusion, the authors Milton and Barakat they argue that higher education has significant potential to catalyze post-war recovery if supported strategically. It calls for more holistic approach, recognizing higher education's role. And the paper argues that higher education is connected to major post-conflict challenges and can accelerate recovery across multiple dimensions if properly harnessed. So, based on the article, there are several key arguments that are articulated, especially on the role of higher education in post conflict recovery and stabilization. Um, Higher education, as we know, is often neglected, underfunded in post conflict reconstruction efforts, despite its potential to contribute to recovery. The sector faces major challenges in conflict affected areas, including physical destruction, population displacement, war related conditions, and low resilience. Higher education can play both stabilizing and destabilizing roles in post conflict environments. It can contribute to instability through politically active students and academics, campuses becoming ideological battlegrounds, and educated employment creates grievances. It can also support stabilization, though, by reducing conflict recidivism, providing alternatives to violence for youth, and contributing to security sector reform. And um, Yeah, so higher education, of course, can catalyze recovery across multiple dimensions, as we have mentioned earlier. And I think the most important is like the sector should be viewed as a strategic asset that can accelerate post-conflict recovery if supported properly, rather than as a luxury to be addressed later. A more holistic and sector-wide approach to education in post-conflict settings is needed, moving beyond the focus on just basic education. The overall argument is that higher education, while often overlooked, has significant potential to act as a catalyst for sustainable post war recovery across multiple dimensions, again, if addressed strategically. However, this role is complex and also context dependent. So, this is us just unpacking this key article, and I hope you find this helpful.